Welcome everyone to Telling Your Credit Union Story, top tips from today's experts. This is a CC Way Marketing and Business Development Network meeting, and I'm glad to welcome all of our attendees to today's discussion. My name is Walt Lascos. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Cooperative Credit Union Association. And today I've put together a panel of experts to share their expertise and their secrets for success when it comes to storytelling. And I'm very happy to have them all join us. Let me introduce each one, and then we'll get into a one-on-one presentation from each. Let me begin with Susan Luke Evans, who's directly below me. Susan is a certified speaking professional, global speaking fellow. She's a master storyteller as well as an author, storytelling coach, trainer, and keynoter. She's also a credit union development educator, a longtime friend of mine. Stephanie Smith, all the way over on the lower right hand corner. She is the executive director of America's Credit Union Museum, and she is working with credit union executives, association leaders, and passionate credit union advocates in preserving America's credit union history and philosophy. Stephanie is a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals and the International Council of Museums. Stephanie, as well, is a credit union development educator, I'm proud to say. Right above Stephanie is Richard Ghost, Chief Political Officer at Credit Union National Association. Richard is a veteran of advocacy for some 34 years. He's worked as a political affairs and trade association professional, applying his expertise and his experience of campaign politics, grassroots activation, and a well-developed understanding of the legislative process. Richard has worked in political operations for three major trade associations, the National Association of Home Builders, the American Insurance Association, and currently he is with the Credit Union National Association. Welcome, Richard. Center screen, lower portion of the screen is Isaiah Moskowitz. Isaiah is the founder and CEO of LTI Business Solutions, a creatively driven marketing and advertising agency based in the Boston area. He is a graduate of the New England School of Broadcasting, and he began his career as a radio on-air personality on Stephen King's rock radio station in Bangor, Maine. So if you see Isaiah rocking out, you'll know why. Since then, Isaiah has continued his career at what is today iHeartMedia in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, serving as a radio personality and creative service director. He's also worked directly with hundreds of clients as a media spokesperson for WJRR and others in Orlando, Florida, Sports Radio WEEI in Boston, the Red Sox Radio Network, WAAF, and WRKO in Boston. So hopefully we have no New York Yankee fans listening to participating in today's presentation. And finally, right above Isaiah, this is a bonus. This is unplanned and new here, is Sarah Snell Cook. Many of you know Sarah. She's the principal of Cook Consulting Solutions, which provides brand building, content marketing, and public relations. She's also the co-founder and publisher of the Credit Union Connection, a media outlet supporting credit unions' thrival by focusing on career development, educational opportunities and events, and business partners that bolster credit union growth. Sarah is a veteran of communications, previously serving in various roles over the past 18 years at Credit Union Times, where she ultimately became publisher and editor, and the last 7 years providing strategic communications consulting and execution for various credit unions and the companies that serve all of them. So welcome to all of you, my panelists, my experts. Welcome to our attendees, and let's kick off our discussion because we're going to try to keep this to about an hour and wrap up around 11 a.m. Eastern time. And I'm going to put the question out there, and then we'll begin with Susan. What works best for you in the way you tell your stories, and why is it important to tell those stories? So Susan, let's begin with you. 5 to 7 minutes for each of you, and then we'll do a general discussion.
Okay. Good morning. I'm in Toronto, just in case anybody wants to know, and I will lead with a disclaimer about the slides that I'm hoping to use here. There we go. This first slide is just not.
We'll get this right, Susan.
Good luck. I've tried several times this morning and I apologize. But let's just start off with, that's okay. Just leave it, Walter.
Okay.
Um, let's talk about this age of disruption that we are in right now. I mean, we've got bank failures, we've got savings that are not large, we have debt, we have inflation, we have unemployment. I could just go on and on and on, but only have 7 minutes. So, in an evolving situation like we have in our world today, our superpower is storytelling and stories. If you want to be in a position of influence, if you want to disrupt or be in a position to drive change, then your individual personal stories, as well as your credit union corporate story, is your superpower. They're one of the few things that we have control over. So, other organizations around the world have successfully integrated stories into their culture, and you probably are using them to some extent as well. Credit unions should not be any different. They should, in fact, use stories because we have, our members, and we know our members' stories. I looked at several different websites of credit unions that are members of CCUA before today, and I went to the member comment section, and basically there were lots and lots of complimentary things. Best credit union ever, great service, friendly service. They know my name. I'm not a number, all those kinds of things. And I thought, what if you could interview some of those people that made those comments and ask them specifically what particular situation happened with the credit union that made them put that kind of a comment on the website? And see what they say, because now you've got an actual story about an actual specific event. And in my experience, when credit unions understand how those individual personal stories influence their corporate story, then they can use them to explain their uniqueness. You're going to get lots of tips today, as Walter said, from panel members. Some will, none of them will be wrong. Many of them will overlap. And your job is just to decide which ones can you integrate into your credit union culture that will help you and enhance what you do for your members. So I'm going to give you a few lists today about that. And so we will talk about that. So we're going to define culture. Your culture is made up of all the individual stories, as well as your history, your vision, your leadership, your value proposition, what you do within your own community, what kind of partnerships you have, what makes you unique, all those kinds of things. And what are your member touch points where you get to see or understand better what's going on. In terms of some of the advantages of storytelling, let's see, stories allow you to elevate your messages so that you can maximize your influence with your members and in your community. Can help with recruiting and retention and onboarding. It can increase your membership eventually. It can certainly enhance your member experience. I used to live in Hawaii. My credit union was Hawaii Federal Credit Union. I went in there one day, and there was a teller that was working with a deaf member and using sign language. Now, that credit union, collectively, their staff spoke 8 different languages because they had a very diverse membership. But I'd never seen anybody use sign language in the credit union. So I knocked on the CEO's door and I said, "Hey, when did you start doing this?" And she looked at me and she said, "Well, Kathy, the teller out there, just did it on her own. She went and took the course. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't ask for money. She just did it." And so I waited around a little bit and I went and talked to Kathy. And I said, "How come you decided to do this?" And here was her answer: "I don't think any member should have an experience different than any other member." They only had one deaf member, but she went to all that trouble just so that particular member would have the same kind of experience that all the other members did when he came into the credit union. That's a pretty magical thing in terms of the culture of that credit union. You can use stories to enhance productivity of your staff, to engineering epiphanies. That means those aha moments. And of course, during presentations of awards and recognition. Vancity Credit Union in British Columbia here in Canada does an amazing job with awards and presentations and recognition. And so during the presentation of those awards at their annual award banquet, they mention not only the recipient of the award, but what was a specific situation that they had with a member, with a community organization or a partner that gave them the opportunity to get this award, because all of them are based on testimonials from either their colleagues or their partners in the community. This is totally out of order. Delivery, no, one more. There we go. No, I did that already. Okay. There's supposed to be a slide in here about the characteristics of a story. I don't know where it went. So this is the wonder of cyberspace, and it's probably operator error. So I apologize.
But there you go, Susan, and the importance of storytelling. We don't have to worry about the slides, but it's the storytelling that counts.
Well, there's certain things that you need to know about the characteristics of good stories. They have to be universal. What that means is that everybody in your audience has some connection to that story. If I tell you stories about my amazing grandchildren, who happen to live in Westford, Massachusetts, by the way, you will identify with that story for one of several reasons. You may have grandchildren or children of your own. You may have, at the very least, been a child yourself, or you may identify with a specific situation that those stories are about. Either way, it's universal, and it doesn't necessarily have to be about a credit union story. It can be a personal story that the point is still the same. Characteristics of a story are that they have some sort of foundational principle, or they make a specific point. They also may provide some sort of a decision choice or fulcrum that the audience member needs to make in a similar kind of situation. They certainly have to be memorable. I've actually had clients call me and say, "Can you come and tell the stories about?" And they list them because they heard me before, and yet she said they would say things like, "It took me a while to remember your name," but they remembered the stories. And finally, they called me and said, "Can you come and make a presentation for our group?" Stories, of course, have to be based in truth, because your audience will know exactly whether or not you're telling the truth. Delivery methods, virtual or live, just like today, virtual social media posts, marketing methods and materials, blogs, newsletters, websites, storybooks, podcasts, annual reports, all of those things. A storybook, by the way, also comes from Vancity Credit Union, in that they compile the stories of these various situations into loose leaf notebooks, leave them in their lobbies so that people that are waiting to see a loan officer or whatever have an opportunity to peruse the Vancity stories, which is pretty amazing. So going forward, how will you use your stories in your credit union differently? Example is not the main thing in influencing others. It's the only thing. Albert Schweitzer much smarter man than I, who probably wouldn't have trouble with his slides, said that. And I will say to you, how are you using stories to elevate your message, to maximize your ROI, return on influence? Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Let's move on now to Stephanie, and Stephanie, hear from you for your perspective at the museum.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sue, for teeing that up and telling people to tell their stories. And I'm going to tell you where your story should live. What I've learned in this industry in this short time that I've been here, the people that work in the credit union space are incredibly humble. And it's very difficult sometimes to get people to tell their stories, or to tell their credit union stories, or to tell the stories of the credit union movement. And I think that that's, one way of breaking down these barriers of getting people to share their stories is to break it down into those smallest components. It's telling your
Stephanie,
story.
Stephanie,
Yep.
if I might interrupt, could we come back to you? Could you check your microphone? Because I'm getting crackling and breaking up, and I don't want to lose you because what you have to say is important. So we're going to jump ahead to Richard, so that you could check your mic, and then we'll come back to you after Richard's done.
Sounds good.
So let's do that if we can. So Richard, I think we should bring you up and have you do your gig.
All right. Well, thank you all, and I really do appreciate it. And I think Susan set this up just brilliantly the way she did it. She's obviously a great storyteller, but she's also a great thinker, because the way she laid it out, I think is paramount to our success. And I would say, just right off the bat, one of the things, if your dog barks at the mailman but not at a rabbit when you're rabbit hunting, your dog's not doing its job. And part of our problem is we tell great stories to one another, but we don't always tell them to people that make a difference in our lives and our movement, in terms of the people who are the lawmakers, the decision makers, the regulators. One of the things that's very important to us is to know the research and know where we are. And we know that the credit union mission and what credit unions do every day to serve their members matters. The fact that we're returning earnings to our members, the cooperative structure, the fact that we're building support in our communities, those all register extremely well and have for years with voters. We also, from a political position, are constantly monitoring what's going on in the here and now, because literally 6 months, a year can change the world. And I think we've seen that in recent times of what's gone on in our environment, and people talk about things differently. And I'll give you a prime example. A year and a half ago, people were talking, you'd hear people mention people are living paycheck to paycheck. People are living paycheck to paycheck. Today's voice, a lot of people are saying, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. That nuance of changing from what they see in others, to them applying it directly to themselves, is a change in emotion. And that's an important element to reaching people where they are and reaching them in the moment. And I think that's extremely important as we look to tell stories and be effective. Another is being trusted. That trusted voice. We ask, because we fight all the time with various people trying to overregulate and to pass laws that are not favorable to credit unions. A lot of these groups may be well-intentioned, but they come under the guise of consumer groups. Consumer Federation of America, you get the National Reinvestment Coalition, you get all sorts of groups. We tested it. We said, who do you trust? Do you trust these groups, or do you trust your credit union? A overwhelming majority trusted their credit unions over any other voice out there. We have a powerful platform. As Teddy Roosevelt used to say, we have the bully pulpit. We just have to use it. And there's various groups with whom we perform better than others, but it's important, and our voice matters. To that end, I think one of the things, you talk about having those stories and being able to deploy them in a place. We have such a platform. It's called Advancing Communities, where we talk about credit unions and talk about what we're doing to serve our members each and every day and as a whole, and why we are a better option than other financial institutions out there for many people who are trying to make their way in the world. And in those stories, we combine stories from the credit union staff talking about what they're doing to serve their members directly. Then we're also talking to members. This lady you'll see there, Melissa on the right, this woman talked about how she got her first home and how she had to be saved, how she was told no, not now, but, and how to get to the but. And then we also interviewed the staff person at the credit union that worked with her for 3 years to get her into the house and what it meant to her. Those are important stories that resonate and go beyond just numbers with members of Congress and regulators. We also try to tie in heavily with the community about what credit unions are doing, not just to lift an individual member, but an entire community, and how our presence in that community offers hope, offers a difference. We're doing this across the country. So when a legislator says, okay, I see your numbers, but what does this mean? What does it mean? Well, then we point them to all the stories their people have really been affected and how it has changed not just their lives, but their community lives. We also talk with community leaders, mayors, and others about their relationship with credit unions and how the credit unions have been there for them at the time of need. These are extremely important aspects to not just telling your story, but getting your story out there. With our system, you can literally share your story online. You can pre-record it, load it, and in many cases, we have gone out to the states and done the stories within the credit unions themselves, where they bring in members, and it has worked very effectively to get our message out. We provide helpful hints and just simple little things about how to shoot your own little video of yourself. These don't have to be long. They don't have to be epic. They just need to be from the heart. They need to be that sense of why it made a difference to you or in your life. And I think, to Susan's point, your passion comes through when you tell the story correctly. One of the other things that we do is not just tell a story, but set up a story where we use social media and we do things around things, whether it's our financial literacy programs, it's our senior safe programs, it's the things that we do and focus on that helps our members. And when we hit those items or those areas that matter to people, you see spikes on ads. You see it every day. We track it. So we see what's happening in the space. And when you get something talking about something like inflation, talking about how that hurts people, you literally see those legislators. Again, these ads and what I'm talking about now, we're targeting not just to people in general, but specific to legislators and their staffs and people who are the decision makers. So our dog is barking at a rabbit, not the mailman in this case. And that's extremely important for us and our advocacy efforts. And when you look at the performance and you look at the stories and you come back and you look at time on site, we're having folks, we have been able to increase, we're over 2 minutes that people are spending on the site. So they are literally watching the stories. And some of these folks come back again and again, and they pick different stories, and we're able to see the fruits of our labor through these efforts. And it makes a big difference when we, move forward. And then we look at the platforms where people are. So for us, it's not just, getting it out there. It's how can we better get it out there? What can we do that, takes us to that next level? So when my only advice, and I kind of will wrap up with this, I know I don't want to run over time so we can have additional questions. My only advice to you is when you look at your credit union, you look at your members, loan officers are, and I think Susan said it too, when we're humble. And part of our problem is things that we take for granted, that teller, learning sign language to help that member, that she's not out there talking about it because she's too humble to do it. But when we are looking to tell our story, we have to get over our humbleness and get into what we're doing to help our members, because we can't help our members if we have regulations and we have laws that prevent us from doing as much as we can for our members. So get over the humbleness, talk about what we're doing to help folks. And I'll give you one example. We had a credit union in West Virginia during the pandemic they always had a tax prep program in their credit union, and they helped their individual members. Well, because it was COVID, because so many people didn't have access to their normal accounting structures and things that help them every day, they opened up their drive-throughs. They would literally have folks drive through their branches, open them up, non-members, members alike, and they would help them in their tax prep. Those are things that are outstanding stories and show the commitment that we need to be proud of, and we need to communicate, not just with ourselves, but with our lawmakers.
Thank you so much, Richard, for sharing your perspective on that. Now let's go back. Try Stephanie again. Stephanie, let's see what your audio sounds like.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We could hear you. Yeah, you sound good. Good.
Okay, let's try this again. So keeping along the same theme, I said earlier that the people in the credit union movement are incredibly humble, and it's hard to get those stories out, which, we've already learned from my fellow panelists here. But I think what we need to do is break down exactly where those stories come from. And, from the museum perspective, it's an individual story, it's a credit union story, and it's a story that, encompasses the entire movement. And maybe once you get over the initial, how do we do this? And you get these stories, it becomes, where do these stories live? Walter and I have had many conversations where we realize that the history that is living now isn't going to be living forever. So you wish you could just put, a recorder on the Sunday dinner table and capture the stories of your family. And I think that that's the approach that we need to take with credit union stories, because, I think we are a big family. You go to GAC and you hug more than you do at, Thanksgiving dinner, my family. So I think it's really important that we do capture these stories, and the museum is a great place for these stories to live. And Walt, if you can bring up my next slide, I'll sort of walk you through that. We have a couple of different programs where we're capturing stories specifically right now, and we're doing the Herstory, the Credit Union Women Making History. We launched it last year. We inducted 20 women and their stories into the museum, and we had enormous response to us saying, hey, tell us about the amazing credit union women. So we are carrying that program forward this year. We are in the final stages of announcing the next group of women that will be inducted. And we actually have these stories of these women that talks about their credit union journey, what inspired them, the people that lifted them up along the way, what was important to them, and what kept them in the credit union space. So that's sort of one of our examples of how we capture the individual stories. And then we have our project that we're working on now, and it's a live project. It's the state history, where you see the map in the middle of the screen here. It's actually an interactive display here at the museum where every single credit union in the country has been asked to upload their history to the museum, so it doesn't go away. And it's as simple as credit unions taking the About Us portion from their website. There's no format that it needs to be in. It's telling the story of your organization and what's important to your organization, maybe adding some pictures, a little bit of, chronological, relevance of where you've been, where you're going, and how your credit union has grown, and incorporate it into the museum. There's no better place for your story to live than in the museum, and it's absolutely free. And we wish more credit unions would participate in it. So, if you're listening to this show today from a credit union and your credit union is not part of this, I encourage you to reach out to me and I will get you the links and how you can do that. And then the last thing that the museum's doing is the program that Walt and I touched upon, Moments in Credit Union History. This is where we capture those stories of people that were part of stories of the credit union movement moving forward. The people that were at HR 1151, the people that were there when they signed the legislation, the people that, broke down barriers for women working in credit union leagues. And it's our way of capturing those oral histories to have a space in the museum where they can live forever and continue to inspire people. And I think a lot of times we don't realize that things that we're doing today, how they'll impact future generations. And that's probably the best piece of advice that I ever received in this role was, you don't know what's in the museum today that somebody 100 years from now will think is important. And a perfect example for the museum of that is back in January, we took delivery of 25 enormous boxes of Ed Filene's personal papers. And it's like a treasure trove. We open a box, once a week when we know what we're going to do with it. And we see speeches that he gave or his ideas. And it's literally like looking at Ed Filene's Pinterest page from 150 years ago. So it's super cool for us. Here at the museum, we love history and we love hearing those stories. But those are what resonate with our visitors. Those are what resonate within the industry. Knowing where we have come from helps to form where we're going. And stories are the way to do that. Absolutely, 100%.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Let's move over to Isaiah now and get his perspective on storytelling.
Well, I appreciate that, Walter, and it's an honor to be here with this panel. I love everything that all of you have said to this point. It makes total sense. And I have one slide, and that slide is up here. And what's your story? So my background, as Walter described, from the radio broadcast world, the media world, the sports marketing world, outside the credit union world, my job is to tell stories for my clients. And it goes back to when Walter said I started in radio as an on-air personality. Think about what I'm doing when I'm turning the microphone on, or anybody who does a radio show or a TV show or a podcast or a blogger or an influencer on social media. What are they doing? They have to tell a story, and they have to get people's attention. That is so hard to do. That is really hard to do. And I can speak to that for 30 years of working in broadcast and being an on-air personality. How do you get somebody's attention? It's hard to do. And it was a lot harder. It's a lot harder now than it was in 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, because just the distractions and the disruptions, as one of my panelists mentioned earlier, that are happening in the world. There are so many things that pull people's attention right now. So how do you tell that story? It's very different on every platform. And what's great to listen to each of you talk about the credit union world. I've been very fortunate to work with Walt Laskos and the CCUA for the past 5 years, and Stephanie on projects. I was involved in that Herstory project. That is a spectacular project, by the way. You have to see that. You have to go to the museum and understand the depth and the history of these powerful women and each one of their stories. I was very blessed to be able to sit at the museum and do some podcasts with some of these women, and the things they said, that was their story. The emotion that they shared with me. Now, I've been an interviewer for a long, long time, so I use that skill to sit down with people and get that story out of people, pull the story out. So, and back to what I was saying, I digress. Working with the credit union space for the past 5 years, I've been able to look from the outside in and say, okay, what aren't you doing? What story aren't you telling? And I think you all hit on that. The humbleness of the people in the industry is beautiful, but you do have to get over that, because the story of the teller working with a deaf member is a story in and of itself. Anything we do as far as social responsibility is a story in and of itself. And those stories need to be told. So as humble as you may be in the credit union space, you work with somebody like me and say, that's okay. We have to tell this story. And how do we do that? If we do traditional media buys in radio, TV, outdoor, what do you put on those things? How do you articulate that to the general population? And I go back to one of the early comments here. It's telling that story and telling it on the right platform at the right time, right? And it's so hard to get that calculation right. But I loved the stats that you put up, one of the panelists put up, about when you tell the right story, you can see the reaction. So one of my original projects with Walter and the CCUA was to focus on elder financial exploitation. Major problem in the world. Multi-billion-dollar business, as sad as it is to call it a business. But Walter hired me, and we sat down and we said, look, we reach credit unions in 4 states with the CCUA, and we really need to articulate how much it is the credit union's responsibility and the bank's responsibility to try to protect people against these scams that are everywhere like viruses. And we went around town by town, state by state, and we would set up events at senior centers. And it was not hard to get the local media, that was my job, to pay attention, because it was a story for these people. It was, look, these are your local lawmakers, your local credit unions, your local people in your towns having conversations about how do we stop getting scammed. And that was a story in and of itself. And they're not good stories. Unfortunately, they're scary stories, but it was an educational platform that we used. So again, I leave this one slide up because I want you all to think on the panel and the people watching that personally in your life, what is your story? Like, think about that. What is your story? Stephanie, you run an amazing museum up there, right? Think about that. That's your story currently. And that is what the world needs to know about you. And all the stories inside that museum are worth telling over and over and over again, so that people in 100 years still remember what all of this means. And I did a presentation down in Orlando, Florida to SeaWorld, which was pretty mind-blowing. That's a pretty big operation. And it was when Anheuser-Busch actually owned SeaWorld. And they would do the same things over and over and over again. And I got a chance to present and look at this board of directors, which we all know what that is, and this whole group of people that ran SeaWorld. And I started my presentation with, I want you to think about what's changed in your life in the last 6 months. Think about that. What's changed in your personal life in the last 6 months? Everybody's thinking about something right now. Okay, that's your own personal story. And then I said to the folks and the executives at SeaWorld, what do you think has changed in the millions of people that walk through the gates of SeaWorld every day in the last 6 months? You can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. You have to think differently. You have to understand your audience. And it's not easy to do. But in the credit union world, we have the data. We know who the men and women are that come to our institutions, borrow money, trust us. You know, I heard trust earlier. They trust us. They give us all this information. Use that to tell a better story. You know, I'm blessed to work with credit unions that really lean into technology. You have to these days. You have to be able to provide what that person needs. And if you tell a story, it's got to hit that nerve. So if it's social responsibility, if it's about cause marketing, then so be it. If it's about going back to telling that story of the teller working with that deaf member, that's your story. And that will make people look up. So it's an honor to be on this panel. And really, I'm learning a lot listening to all of you talk, but I just put up one thing right there. What's your story? Think about what your story is as a credit union, as a person, and tell it over and over again so that people start to trust you.
Thank you, Isaiah. And let's go finally to Sarah Snell Cook to get her perspective on storytelling. Sarah, you're up.
You're on mute.
You didn't hear my great joke. Dang. Anyway, I'm excited to bring up the rear. So I'm going to be talking, I agree with everybody. Well, you'll see in a little bit. I agree with most of what everybody has said, and just a little nuance to it. As the perspective of a journalist and a PR practitioner, storytelling is best when it's strategically intertwined with a holistic communication strategy. Your mission is to influence audiences, as many have talked about already today. But by strategic, I mean it needs to be aligned in a solid communications plan that includes marketing, like the testimonials that Susan recommended, to public relations, to social media, to internal communications, to your teller training. All your communications should be aligned, and they must be aligned to your brand and coordinated, because what you put out in the world, it becomes your brand, it becomes your story. So a lot of people think of brand and they think of logos and colors. That is actually a visual representation of that is a visual representation. And what does that make people feel about you? Are they excited? Are they proud? Are they enraged? Do they feel nothing at all, which might be worse? So as somebody who has the emotional intelligence of a toddler, I always promote find the feels, okay? Be authentic, be honest. One of the things, I mean, when I was a DC reporter at Cranium Times, I worked with Richard a lot, and he really knows his political stuff. And you remember what he says and his expertise because of how he says it. So it's very important. Richard's dog stories all the time crack me up. But that's authentic to him. And whatever is authentic to you is what you need to be sharing out there. I have had the opportunity and the fortune to be able to share stories of Crayons working with incarcerated people who to help them get off on the right financial foot. One shared a success story with me that a man who had been in and out of jail most of his life, his goal, his dream was to buy a home for him and his mother. And the problem with recidivism often is that it is the environment that they return back to. So getting him out of there was very important. This credit union worked with community partners. They got him a bus pass, a series of bus passes to help him get to work because transportation is an issue in that area. And they also helped him get the job that he ended up doing. He started out part-time, ended up managing the store, a t-shirt shop, I believe it was. So they put him on a budget faster than he even planned. He qualified for their special mortgage program. This is ending the cycle of imprisonment, incarceration. This is ending the cycle of generational poverty. And those are your stories. So how do you do that? And there's a paradox, and this is why I say there's a bit of I deter a little bit from what my fellow panelists have said. There's a paradox of humbleness, because no, we don't often talk about stories like that. At the same time, when we do start talking, and we do start doing public relations, we need to stop talking about ourselves. While it's not what's intended, it does come across as a persistent narcissism that's pervading our storytelling. It's not just credit unions, but credit unions are the ones I care about. So that's why I'm sharing this with you. We all the time in journalism, we would receive press releases of the guys with ties with the giant checks or the golden shovels or what have you. No, that's not going to make you stand out to the journalist nor to your community necessarily. But, you have a picture or a video and a story about the special needs kids using that playground that's safe for them, and a quote from a parent about how relieved and grateful they are. Yes, that is your story. So, and do it on repeat, as Isaiah said, running the largest credit union publication at the time, it was a very humbling moment when, I know all of you remember the corporate credit union crisis in 08, 09. It was very, Walter, I don't know if you remember that one.
You're right.
Biggest news of the decade in the credit union movement. And those stories, most read stories we had ever had. It was about 10,000 reads in the first week. But if you think about it, at the time, there were about 10,000 credit unions. And let's assume each of those credit unions have 5 executives. So that's 50,000 people at least, just in the executive suite that we should have reached. 10,000 page views. If you consider 20% of those were repeats, we're not uniques. 8,000 of our 50,000 audience is all we reached.
Oh.
Repeat over and over again, because you got to assume, and that was humbling for me, but you got to assume nobody reads everything you write or say or whatever. So yes, you may feel repetitive. Nobody's going to notice.
Frequency.
Yes. Frequency. Yeah. So, and your story may be different for the local media versus B2B. I see press releases all the time that go to the Credit Trade Press about, a branch opening. Well, that credit union branch means something different to your local community. It's about, maybe filling a banking desert for the community, or it's in a local senior center to ensure they have easy access to the institution. For the Credit Trade Press, your angle is branching strategy, culture, technology incorporated, member service, return on investment, and then hot dog. You got two different people paying attention, two different audience paying attention to what you're having to say. So be sure to target the right audience with the right story at the right time. So bottom line, my tips: be strategic in your storytelling and brand building. Find the feels and stop talking about yourself. It's not about you. Your story, your brand is a collection of your members and your community's stories. Then finally, just know your audience. Target the key members of the media who reach your ideal members, and understand what that reporter, that editor, that journalist needs and what they care about, in addition to the target audience. Because there are reporters who want a Pulitzer, and there are reporters who want to get home at 5 to let their dog out. Okay. Everybody's different. So building that relationship, understanding them, that's going to help you get your story out. And so, like a good storyteller, I've made my key points and I'm out.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Hey, listen, I'm gonna add to that as well, that from a perspective that I see a lot of times, I basically believe, and I'm gonna maybe a general discussion for a couple minutes here. I feel that today's consumers are spoiled, and we need to cater to them. And by that I mean is they're looking 24/7 for information, for news, whatever that might be, and they're not just reading the newspaper, or they're not just on the radio. It's a variety of media that we need to be tapping and using for our storytelling. So I think when we look at it, it's not just the content of what we're saying and what we're focusing on, but also applying that content though to the proper media. And sometimes that might be across several different media platforms. And as we say, it's the redundancy. I've heard how many times since my first day in West Corp, you have to tell them again and tell them again, because hearing it once, it doesn't filter into the brain. It has to be multiple times.
It used to be a 3 frequency, Walter. It really was a thing back in radio in the day, where you'd build a schedule for a client where it was what was called a 3 frequency. If you can hit an audience 3 times, that has elevated to in the 20s. Go look it up. The fragmentation of messaging is obscene. It really is crazy, because you have every social media platform, 24-hour news cycles, still your traditional radio, TV, outdoor, sports marketing, and everything else that comes to your email. It's very, very, very hard to do what I do and market. But to everyone's point, and a few people made a very good point, find that audience and really get in there and go and frequently tell the story. And I love the piece that was just mentioned about, you've got to also understand these reporters. Like you say, somebody wants to go out and win the Pulitzer. Somebody just wants to go home at 5 and feed their dog. But if I'm a reporter for the Boston Globe and I write on culinary arts, then that's what I do. Don't talk to me about something. That's what I do. So if you find somebody who's in the social responsibility swim lane, for example, or the community swim lane, they're going to be more apt to, no guarantee, talk about your story. I mean, Walt, you and I did a great piece with as a legendary broadcaster here in Boston. His name is Carl Stevens, works for WBZ. And he did one of these with us years ago. And he sat down with us and he did a webinar. and he looked, and we invited all the marketing people from as many credit unions that wanted to come on, and he looked right at them and said, "You're not going to get my attention. Like, it's going to be really hard to get my attention. You need to know what I'm thinking. And even when you know what I'm thinking, my editor has given me a totally different path than, that morning." So it's so hard to get in that flow, but it's all part of what each person has said here: strategic storytelling.
And that is certainly the challenge when it comes to working with the news
Oh.
media and all that. But Richard, I'm thinking in your perspective, when like we were talking earlier about 24/7, all the different platforms, you're doing that with a lot of the work that you do for CUNA.
Well, we are, and I'll add something here. And more people are looking for reaffirmation of their own opinion than they are new information. It's I know. Will you agree? I walk into a room. I don't ask people what party they belong to or whatever. I ask where they get their news, and I know how to talk to them based on where they go to get their information. And I think the beautiful thing about credit unions is we have a unique ability to appeal to people on enough different levels that we're one of the few groups that actually cut across some of those areas. Now, how you position and couch, that's why on a partisan basis, we do just as well with either side of the aisle than anybody else, because we have that connective tissue, because we're something very personal to people. And when you talk about something people care about and a value proposition, and that is something that I always come back to, is you need to hit people at the value proposition. What do I care about? I can ask you, I can ask Isaiah if he likes a red shirt or a blue shirt, but if Isaiah's not looking for a shirt, he might give me an answer, but it doesn't matter because it's
Right.
not important to him. But if Isaiah's sitting there and he needs a shirt, then it matters. So
Right.
that's kind of where we are. We need to first find out, what do you care about? What do you relate to? And deliver that story to that person at the right time on the right platform where they're going to be looking for it or already engaged. And that's the difference too. We're not just delivering stuff to them. We're now engaging because they can
Right.
talk back to us.
Well, that's asking people, like that SeaWorld story. That's asking people to answer their own question. What are you thinking about? Not me, not what I think my message is. Like, Stephanie, what are you thinking about today when you go shopping at Market Basket in London? Like, you know what I mean? Like that, like, what are you thinking about? Then I know that I can put something in front of Stephanie because she's told me she goes to Market Basket in Loudon, New Hampshire on Fridays, and boom. Like that, like if I just blanket throw it out there, it's the net approach is not good.
Well, the other angle too is, and one thing that we have to do, and I know Richard does at CUNA and all that, is, and certainly Sarah, you see this from your perspective back in the day, and Isaiah, you as well too, is the data that we already have, that credit unions already have. We have a fairly good, my God, probably a tremendous value in knowing the data of our members. Where
they're giving you the answer to the quiz
for everything. Correct. So once you have that understanding of where they're at, what their needs are, what they're looking for, that sets up the ground for being able to storytell. One thing I do want to throw out before I ask each of you for your final comments is, I remember back in the day hearing one CEO saying that, when you're telling your story and you're saying all this good stuff that you do, it's like bragging, and he didn't like that. And it was he did not like that. It's like, no, don't do that. Let me just throw that out to any of you. What's your reaction to something like that? Is it bragging, or do we have a responsibility to tell our story, to tell the credit union story?
We have a responsibility. Everybody has a responsibility.
Absolutely. And that CEO hopefully checked his ego and decided he's not representative of everybody.
You have to tell it. You have to tell your story.
And find somebody who can do it if you can.
I think what we see a lot of, in particular what I see, somebody that has done, amazing things in the credit union space isn't necessarily first to jump up and say, hey, I did this, look at me. But there is an army of people behind them that want you to know the story.
Yes.
And that is, so you need to engage the army versus the general.
Well, yeah, be humble about what you do, and that's a beautiful thing, and that makes us better than other financial institutions but there has to be a marketing plan and strategic plan, as we mentioned, a PR plan. Someone's got to say there are uncomfortable moments. I sat down with a credit union that was working with a major charity which did things for seriously wounded veterans. And nobody wants to walk in the room and say, where are you going to say my name? But I had to be the one to do that in a way that said, yes, this is wonderful, but how do we articulate that this credit union is behind this movement doing this special thing for these veterans? And I had to be the one to do it. And it was okay because, there's a lot of humbleness in the room, but you have to say your name.
And one thing that I know that I want to call Richard in on this, because part of the storytelling that caught me and I remembered about Richard was a number of years ago when he spoke about the importance that credit unions have and what they do when it comes to financial education, financial literacy. And when it comes to the lawmakers and the issue of taxation, as soon as you start telling the credit union story about what we do for the underserved and what we do for financial literacy and education, the arguments are over. The lawmakers make their decision, and it's no taxation. We preserve our identity as credit unions. Richard, if you would comment on that.
Yeah, and I think you made a point before that too that I think ties into this. Numbers are important. Lawmakers, everybody wants to prove, but proof without context and proof without action is just numbers. And the stories bring those numbers to life. And when you look at our financial literacy and the concern that we have for our members, and again, a lot of times that goes back to something Sarah said. You'll see a credit union go out here and they'll present a check, or they'll take a picture of the little branch that they opened at the local school. That's not what financial literacy is. Financial literacy is the FISERV program, where we're helping people along their financial journey all along the way when they have that moment where they had medical issues or they lost their job, and you help them get back on their feet. That's part of financial literacy. That's how you put it in your budget. And I've heard credit union after credit union tell me the story about how this person came in and they were desperate, they were at their wits' end, and how they helped consolidate. They gave them an education, and financial literacy is more than a program. It is an individual approach to our members, and it is a discerning difference between us and other financial institutions. And I would also add one other thing. It's not just a message, it's a messenger. And when that member can deliver that message to how that credit union changed their lives, kind of go back to Sarah. There's your story hook. There's your I got your eyes on what I'm talking about moment.
I hate to say it, but I think age also comes in on this, because when I was doing a lot of presentations for senior financial exploitation and how to protect seniors, from scams and fraud, the facts played out where it was easier for me to stand in front of the seniors because of my age in terms of credibility and all that, as opposed to someone that might have been in their 20s. Not that I'm belittling that, but those factors come into play in that whole storytelling and identity. Let me wrap up here, and I'm going to go ask Susan first, and maybe each of you, if you could take 30 seconds to at least share some closing comments and maybe the key message that you really want our listeners to stay with, from what you said. So Susan, if you would, please.
Well, thank you, Walt. I'll just piggyback on what everybody has said in different ways and from different perspectives. And that is this. In my experience, when I work with clients, credit union clients or whomever, what we know is that facts tell, but stories sell. And if you want to get your message out there, you have to tell your stories. And remember that just because you have stories doesn't mean you tell them well. And so we need to look at context. We need to look at how we use our voice, how we use our gestures, all those kinds of things, in addition to how do we structure the story? Do we start at the beginning, or do we start at the end, or do we start somewhere in the middle? It matters depending on your audience. It matters if you're talking verbally, whether virtually or live and in color, or if you're writing it. And when you write it, you have to write it differently than you deliver it, because you need the context of where that particular story happened, how it happened, why it happened, all those kinds of things. And you need to describe that more fully than you might in person. I'll piggyback on Sarah for just a minute. And she talked about your brand and all of that. The personality of your credit union / your culture is your brand. And once it's out there, you can't control it like you might think you do, because people talk to other people. And so what are the stories that we tell? What are the stories behind those bullet points? What are the stories behind the annual report, behind all the other kinds of things that we look at? And those are the stories we need to tell. Those are the stories that will help the credit union have a sustainable influence in the community and with their members.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Let Stephanie, a closing comment.
At the risk of cheating on the answer, I'm going to just remind you all of one of the taglines of the museum, and that's that every credit union has a story to tell. And what is your legacy, and what is going to be important in 100 years from now? I think as long as you keep those guidelines at the forefront, you're going to tell the story the way it needs to be told.
Thank you, Stephanie. Richard.
Yeah, I would close. I think there's been a lot of wonderful comments, and I think that this, if you're listening to this for the first time, you can see how it all comes together. And I would just say this: there is a story behind every member that walks into your credit union, and whether it's your loan officer, it's your teller, or it's your CEO, everybody, and it's been said again, has a story. Getting that out, delivering it to the right people at the right time, with the right voice is imperative if we're going to keep credit unions' ability to serve our members alive and well going forward.
Thank you, Richard. Isaiah.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great. I think everybody here has spectacular knowledge on storytelling. I've learned, and I hope everybody that's viewing and listening and watching this learns whenever they watch it. I will go with this: think differently. I need people to think differently. You've got a story. It's all been said here. How the story is told is important. I need you to think differently about your stories and how you tell your stories. I'll leave you with that.
All right. Thank you, Isaiah. And finally, Sarah.
So be sure to communicate on a regular basis, as well as showing your stories. Yes, it's great to tell your story, but if we can find a way to show it, that's even better. For example, a lot of people have talked about data to support what you're trying to influence. Creating an infographic with your branding and then sharing it with the media that you're trying to hit, that's very helpful, because one of the first things, newsrooms budgets are tight, really tight right now. And, one of the first things to go is their designers. So if you can do that to help them, as well as get your own brand out there, that's a little sub tip. Also, video, things like that are imagery. Definitely, I love words, but a picture paints 1,000 words. Finally, I would say public relations, storytelling, marketing, all that. It's not just throwing out a press release. Media training for your subject matter experts would be incredibly valuable for your credit union, as well as your local reporters who might want somebody who's an expert on real estate in the local market, who understands what the Fed's moves mean to the members in that community. So be ready for positive PR, because as you do that training, you're going to be ready for the crisis when it happens, and it will happen.
There you go. Hey, listen, my thanks to all of you, my expert panelists, for joining us today, and also my thanks to all those who participated as attendees watching today's webinar and who will watch it in days to come. I appreciate it all. Again, I'm Walt Laskos for the Cooperative Credit Union Association, and thank you all for joining us, and that concludes today's webinar.
Thanks, Walt.
Thanks, Walt.
Thank you.